welcome to the Tenney Group's 2025 Mid-Year M&A Report. We've got a great all-star buyer panel for you, and I can't wait for you to hear what they have to say about what's been going on and what's going to be happening in the back half of 2025. With us today, we've got Rebecca White from Keenan Advantage Group, Head of Strategy and Corporate Development, and also founder and CEO of Radiant Logistics, Bon Crane. Folks, welcome to our panel.
Thank you, Spencer. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Spencer. Really happy for the opportunity.
Well, it's been a very crazy time. We have all kinds of disruption in this space, but still deals are getting done. And I can't wait for you to share about what you're seeing in this space. But before we get too far in this conversation, let's just set the stage. Why are we doing this? Well, number one, I believe peers learn best from peers and what they're doing in the marketplace. And I believe that this conversation is going to elevate the deal IQ for our global network, folks that are trying to advance their positions via acquisitions or through business sales. And so that's what we're going to try to do here. I think there's going to be something for everybody in this conversation. So we have some context for the insights that are coming ahead. Rebecca, just take a minute or so and tell us about the work that you're doing at Keenan Advantage Group and a little bit more about your transaction history over the last 12 to 18 months.
Thank you. I've been fortunate to have Bon leading KAG's growth strategy for the past 8 years. So KAG is the largest bulk transportation and logistics company in North America, and acquisitions are core to our growth strategy. So as EVP of Strategy and Corporate Development, I'm very focused on our acquisitions. And over the past 18 months, we have completed 9 transactions. 4 of those were in the dry bulk space, so a new sector for us to be creating a platform around. And another one of the companies we partnered with has a solid presence in the ISO tank space. So we're excited to now be expanding into several ISO depots as well. So had a lot of fun and enjoying every minute of it.
I love that. Now, Bon, you are kind of growing in a different vertical, which is part of why I really like what we're going to hear. We're going to get a good sample of what's going on across multiple sectors in our space. But yeah, if you would do the same, tell us about what you've been up to the last 12 to 18 months.
Sure. Let's start with, we are a public company that I started back in 2006, and we try to stay true to the non-asset-based third-party logistics space. In our early days, we were really focused in the agent-based freight forwarding space, and we acquired a number of different agent-based freight forwarders, and that is kind of foundational to kind of where we come from and has been certainly a part of our own acquisition strategy. We'd been quite busy ourselves. I actually, in preparation for this, I kind of went back and pulled the list together. I was a little surprised. So we've actually done 12 transactions, since February of 2024. And about 6 of those, or approximately half, exactly half to be exact, was conversion of our existing agency stations to company-owned stores. So there's a built-in tuck-in acquisition pipeline of our agents that we're converting over. So we did 6 of those. And then there were incremental to that, there were 6 greenfield acquisitions, some in the truck brokerage space, some in the freight forwarding space, and all throughout North America.
So, Bon, you go look at that, and I gave you a little assignment to go, like, just tell me what you're doing. You're like, hey, we're pretty good at this. We're that's your takeaway. Like, hey, we're getting pretty good at this. A little more.
Yeah, we've done over 30. We've done over 30 acquisitions here at Radiant since we got started. So, like Rebecca, kind of the acquisitions is historically, and we expect will continue to be a kind of a key component of our go forward growth strategy.
And I love hearing that because, some of our audience, I mean, they are pretty active as well. And some are just in response to the growing challenges in this space are using acquisitions, some for the first time to begin to diversify their growth strategy. So thanks again for leading in here and sharing some of your insights and some of your experience. So let me start off with this. It's been a crazy first 6 months. Of course, we have all kinds of disruption from financial markets, geopolitical type things, potential wars, all kinds of different things that affect how we do business, but still deals are getting done. And one question that I have for each of you, we'll start with you, Rebecca. What was a transaction that you weren't a part of in the first half of 2025 that got your attention, and why was it relevant?
This is a good question. The sector has definitely been impacted by a lot of the stuff that's going on both inside the freight recession and inside the general economy. So definitely a lot of things going on that have influenced the market, but M&A is still happening in our sector. And so I think it's exciting to see that the market can still find opportunities for deals. And one of the ones that actually caught my attention was, especially when you look at, I guess, the more specialized companies are the ones, right, that are able to still find a way, especially in the middle of a freight recession, a long-going freight recession like we're in. And on top of that, all the tariffs and everything that's impacting a lot of businesses in the general economy. So this more specialized ones are the ones I think that are going to stand out more and be able to transact in environments like this. And one of those that really caught my eye was to see that UPS is acquiring Andlauer Healthcare Group. So obviously very specialized in the cold chain piece of the business, but also very complex on the pharmaceutical side. So really interesting to see that transaction being announced. And I think that's really a testament to deals can still get done, especially if they're very specialized type companies that have something attractive to them and have like a little bit more of a standard in the market where they can really make it through different ups and downs in the industry.
No, that was a great one. Bon, what say you? What was one that you were like, okay, what's going on here?
Well, I'll go to the other end of the spectrum. So DSV's acquisition of DB Shaker, creating the largest global freight forwarder, M&A, will remain a big feature of what's going on. But in connection with that particular transaction, at least from my point of view, those types of transactions always lead to rationalizations of workforce, and a lot of talent gets freed up. And so even though the transaction was done away from us, I kind of view that kind of as a second order effect, of kind of opportunities for kind of the rest of us, out there in the community to potentially, add to our own bench strength.
I think you make a great point. And one of the things that we try to impress upon our mutual industry friends for decades now is that, hey, even if you're not involved directly in M&A, you need to understand how the M&A activity in your backyard may affect the competitive landscape directly or indirectly for you. And that's a great example right there in terms of, hey, though we weren't involved in the transaction, this may influence us, may create some positive things for you. In your example, that there might be some opportunities to go out and upgrade talent in specific strategic positions. And so really interesting takeaway there, Bon. I like that.
Yeah, well, we like to say never waste a good crisis, right? So whether it's the tariffs, or a large transaction, there's all kinds of opportunities that come out of the chaos.
Yeah, I want to just, I wasn't planning on asking this, but I think you bring up a great point, because there's definitely two different mindsets when you're kind of in a period of disruption or crisis, as you mentioned. And some, people that are very comfortable with acquisitions, and many in that situation, they retreat and kind of go to a wait and see posture, where others instinctively see or feel that this is the moment of opportunity to lean in and create value. So I'm curious, how do you all think about that with your teams as we, not just with this specific climate, but any environment? There's always disruption, but how do y'all think about that?
I'll let Rebecca go first.
Sure. I think disruption is always good. I think, in this environment we're in, everything's always evolving. And so you have to be changing. And so I think that continues to keep us focused on making sure that we're always evolving. And I think it was Albert Einstein that said, in the middle of every difficulty lies opportunity, right? So I think as Juan was saying, this is just an opportunity for people. The companies that can find the opportunity are the ones that are going to continue to thrive.
It's a good word, Bon.
Yeah. And, in our particular context, we compete as a public company, we compete against a lot of PE firms in connection with kind of the M&A landscape. And many of our competitors historically or more recently had been fairly aggressive, levered up their balance sheets. And then when kind of the softening market environment, they're in a little bit of a pickle in terms of their own balance sheets and compliance with their financial covenants. And we were kind of at the other end of that spectrum, and we weren't particularly aggressive when the market was super frothy. So we are, I won't say uniquely positioned, but certainly we kind of view our trading window as open. We don't know how long the trading window is going to be open.
Right.
And so we're, historically very aggressive right now in this market environment. We do think this is kind of the time to lean into the opportunity. Of course, you have to understand the risk. You have to structure the transactions correctly, make sure the buyer and seller are on the same page of where we're, what we're all trying to accomplish. But it's been a spectacularly exciting time for us in the opportunity set.
No, I think that'll be great encouragement to a lot of folks. Let's shift our conversation to tariffs. What influence have just the ongoing back and forth of trade wars and uncertainty around tariffs? How has that affected your overall acquisition strategy, perhaps your diligence process? Walk us through that, and we'll start with you, Bon.
Well, we're always just one tweet away from a total pivot, right? So we tried to stay consistent, right? In our cadence and approach. So I think the market will remain choppy, right? It's just an increasingly volatile world, whether it's, tariffs or politics or threats of wars. And so we just have to kind of get ourselves organized and buckle up and kind of be prepared to navigate some of those dynamics. Because unfortunately, I don't think they're going away. But, for the longest time, we were all talking about the new normal, and I think we're all still groping for what the new normal looks like. But I think volatility is certainly going to be a feature for the foreseeable future. And in the context of M&A, historically, we've always used earnouts as we think about our structure and kind of deal mechanics. And the increased volatility just makes it that much more obvious that earnouts are a really good way for the buyers and sellers to share in the risk of that uncertainty.
Good stuff. Rebecca?
Yeah, so as Bon mentioned, obviously the markets are uncertain and volatility. It's not usually a thing that bodes well with the markets, but it is sort of becoming the new norm. As we're trying to figure out what that new norm is. I think it is, just as we talked about, things are constantly changing and evolving, and so it's kind of becoming more of a standard for us. So it's something we have to face on acquisitions and valuations. Fortunately, the bulk sector that we participate in is a little bit more insulated from tariffs, just given that we're most of the parts we're hauling are here in the U.S. and so we're really kind of a little bit more insulated, but it's still challenging to fully understand the impact on various businesses, particularly the tariffs and all the uncertainty around it. But I'm hopeful that the administration appears to be working towards some kind of final states of this so we can all get a better sense for what that means and be able to understand what we think the implications will be as we're thinking for valuation. But as Bon mentioned, it's always an opportunity to use earnouts if we need to. Can definitely complicate the deal structure a little bit, but if it's a way to help bridge the gap, it certainly can be a useful tool.
Yeah, to your point, depending on the target company's exposure to the tariffs, their appetite to lean in, I think that has a lot to do with it. But what we've observed from several of our transactions, even those that have had heavy tariff exposure or cross-border exposure, depending on how far they're in the process, some of that has a lot to do with, if you can get a deal done or not. Sometimes if it's pretty early, people will take a step back, but if they're pretty deep into it, we're noticing that both buyers and sellers are choosing to collaborate and figure out a solve around sharing risk, as you mentioned, Bon, in these situations. I'm curious, what are you noticing from sellers and the way that they respond, the way that they think about risk, specifically around tariffs?
We've generally had a favorable response. I think kind of engagement has been good and kind of what we would hope to see. That's why we're getting so many deals done, candidly. So we've been able to fairly consistently get to a meeting of the minds and a path forward.
Anything to add, Rebecca?
Well, I would say I think that I was in an M&A conference yesterday in Cleveland, and it wasn't just transportation and logistics focused. It was broader M&A, and a number of the private equity firms there were stating that they're definitely seeing a slowdown in the market. So I think maybe it's influencing this uncertainty around the tariffs is maybe influencing sellers' willingness to go to market right now. Like you said, Spencer, if they're already pretty far along, then they're probably still going to continue to move forward the process. But if they were just starting to get things organized or still on the fence, I think a lot of sellers are going to wait and see for a few months and see where things kind of shake out from there. And then if the opportunity starts to present itself as things start to settle down, I think you'll see more of an influx later this year of opportunities in the market. But I think if they have the opportunity to wait and see for a few months, I think that's probably what most sellers are going to do at this point.
Yeah. Spencer, to just kind of circle back on that a little bit, I think to broaden the conversation just slightly is the kind of the lending community's appetite to underwrite deals in the face of the uncertainty. So kind of access to debt capital is certainly tightened up in this environment. So depending on an individual acquirer's own financial flexibility, you wouldn't want to be needing to access debt capital right now to get your deals done. That would be pretty tough. But if you've got financial flexibility within your own balance sheet to get something done, that's kind of part of the opportunity for those folks that are in that position right now.
No, I think that's a great takeaway, especially as business owners, potential sellers are thinking about, because it is, it's a lift to go through a sale process. You want to make sure that there is a definitive path that has a high probability of closing. And to your point, Bon, if the buyer is going to be heavily reliant on, seller's reliant on a pretty aggressive purchase price, and the buyer's heavily reliant on third party debt, capital, whatever else, maybe that doesn't have a high probability of close in this environment. So really, really good to understand who your buyer is and what their capabilities are to get to the finish line. So, with that being said, so many of our folks in our network, I mean, everyone's going to exit at some point in time, and they're always wanting to know, how can I do that and land on the other side of that transaction with the firmest footing possible. Both of you have been highly prolific in your efforts in M&A. You've come across a lot of sellers. What would be some of the characteristics of a company and or the seller themselves, like where you just said that was one of the cleanest transactions, the prototypical best possible seller that we could do business with? Naturally, obviously, the financial performance that kind of goes without saying. But what were some of the other characteristics of that seller, and why did their performance during the deal process make it so easy to acquire them? I'll go with you, Rebecca.
Well, since they're selling a business, as you know, is really challenging, especially one that's been held in by a family for generations, right? They don't have all their historical records, stock certificates, all of the files and documents prepared and ready. So it's a heavy lift, and it's not an easy job when you're putting that job on top of running a trucking company, which is more than a full-time job on its own. So I think it's always a challenging process for sellers going through that process. But we actually had a seller who we worked with recently who wasn't even really looking to prepare for a sale. Our paths crossed. They thought it was interesting. Conversations progressed pretty quickly. And before you knew it, we were full on into a process. And we were asking for all these documents and everything. And it was one of those things where they never got overwhelmed by it. And no matter what documents or information we were requesting, they were turning it around within 24 hours. In fact, a couple of times it was just like within a couple of hours, we'd have the information. And we're used to asking for stuff and having time on the process and waiting for it. And it was great to have that kind of pressure back on us. Like all of a sudden, here's the information. Now it's on us to review it and make sure we're asking questions or checking it off the list. And so we were able to progress the process very quickly given that. And they've been a great partner with us post-closing as well, too, because they're the same kind of level of responsiveness post-closing as we continue to work through a variety of different integration matters and different growth opportunities that we're working on together. So it's been fun to have somebody that's been able to keep up the pace.
I love that response time. I mean, these are just fundamentals, and I think that's just a great. We always talk about with our clients controlling the controllables, and that's a very specific one. So I appreciate that insight. Vaughn, what about you? What are some folks who you're like, man, I wish every deal was this seller?
Yeah, well, something so we've acquired companies of all at both ends of the spectrum. We've acquired other public companies where the information was and flow was tight, and we've acquired very small companies where the financials were practically in a shoebox, that we had to sift through and kind of figure it out. So, we take pride in kind of meeting people where they need to be met in that process. But, similar to what Rebecca was saying, particularly as a public company, we've got to file timely, accurate financial statements. There's no dog ate the homework letter we can send to the SEC about why we didn't get our financials filed timely. So part of the due diligence process and interaction with management is a bit of a litmus test on the ability of the target's back office to interact with us in a timely way, right? And so even before we're getting to what does the information say, and there's kind of all the obvious things we could go through that are kind of relevant in the due diligence process, but just how quickly and accurately were they able to interact with us, or was it a crisis because we wanted comparative year-over-year financial statements, right? So you can learn a lot about kind of the relative health of the company's back office and ability to engage.
And just recently we released like a 7-part series on the title is 7 Reasons You Won't Get What You Deserve from the Sale of Your Transportation and Logistics Company. And one of those talks about responsiveness, just as both of you guys have addressed this. And I think what a lot of folks miss is that, you've acquired 6 companies over the last 6 months-ish, each of you, thereabouts. But you probably evaluated 5 to 6 times those while you were like, and so what I think that what business owners in our industry need to understand is that the buyers are evaluating sellers and specifically the execution risk of putting time and resources around a potential deal at the first point of information request to like Bond, just like you talked about, like their ability to turn around information. It doesn't mean that they're not going to do a deal, but it weighs in like what else are they looking at and what do they want to put time and energy around? And if this takes 5 days to get something that should take 5 minutes, there's a good chance you may have a great company, but you may never get on the dance floor. And so I think like hearing both of you kind of iterate versions of that same thing, I hope that hits home for our network because definitely things that we want to control there. Are there any other advice or any single piece of advice that you would give to sellers that maybe want to exit in the next 3 years? What advice would you give them to help them maximize their future sale?
Well, one of the things that, and we always kind of look for and ultimately kind of insist upon in our own transactions is make sure all the meaningful contributors to the business are accounted for in the transaction. So just make this up. You may have a key seller who's not a equity owner in the business, but you want to make sure that that person is, acknowledged and identified and accounted for. And that can take any number of flavors. But the last thing you want to do is have a key contributor who feels disenfranchised and unappreciated in that process, because that can come back to bite both the buyer and seller.
That's a good word.
And I would add on to that, to Bond's point, is understanding as a seller, understanding what their goals and objectives are out of a transaction. What are they looking for, and what's the right fit for them post-closing, right? How do they want to be involved? How long do they want to be involved? So they can find the right fit from a cultural perspective for what they're looking for and for their team. I think that's really important for sellers to think through as they're starting to think through possibly going to market, going to sell their business. Who's that right buyer for them? You got to look at more like a partnership and thinking through what are going to be the important aspects of that partnership for them going forward.
That's good stuff. So let me transition here. there's a lot of folks out there that, that are out generating M&A activity, but produce far less efficient results than the two of you and your teams when it comes to actually getting deals done. So I'm curious, and maybe Bon, we'll start with you. Just kind of, can you walk us through your process? And maybe there's some new wrinkles based on some of the new risk in the marketplace. But like, how do you go through your screening process and just kind of high level it for us? What are some of the ingredients of that process that has allowed you guys to be successful?
Well, at least I'm sure there's a lot of different ways that you can find success, but, for us specifically, we've approached the kind of the M&A landscape, candidly with my very personal engagement. Kind of philosophically, these are very personal transactions, and in my mind, M&A, this will sound a little counterintuitive, but at least certain aspects of the M&A efforts is not a team sport, right? It is building a relationship, getting to really know me personally, building a relationship with the seller, earning their trust and confidence, that kind of together we will survive this M&A journey together and kind of get to the other side. So it quite literally is take my hand and together we will kind of defeat the gauntlet of lawyers and analysts and everybody else who's kind of making, all playing their role, but kind of helping them through the process as we go. So, there's lots of intermediaries out there at various levels of sophistication in the marketplace. We see tons and tons of teasers, that we would kind of sift through for ones that kind of look like they would, fit our business model. We would, as quickly as we can get a Zoom call, kind of a meet and greet. And assuming that goes well, the next thing that happens is I put my butt on an airplane, and I go break bread with the potential partner. And we try to take it from there.
Yeah. I mean, it's I hear people say this all the time. It's simple, but not easy, right? To execute on that level. I mean, that's a lot of commitment and to develop those relationships, but ultimately, obviously in your case, it certainly created the results that have been desired. So, great stuff.
Right. And I would be remiss if I didn't say I had a big team behind me that actually was cleaning up behind me and actually executing and getting the deal done. Yeah. But it is a very personal experience.
Yeah. And I think what I'm taking away from your comment is that you can have a great team that can execute all the technical elements, but if you skip that relationship development step, you might not make it all the way through. Is that fair?
Absolutely. It's really important. I like to talk in metaphors a lot. I like to make sure to do as good a job as I can of communicating kind of where the bus is going, so people can either get on or, if somebody thinks they're going to LA, but they end up in Albuquerque, they're not going to be very happy. Right. So, I think a big part of a big part of the success is just setting setting the expectations correctly of what it means to transact. And so that then the seller can, on as informed basis or not, make the decision of whether they want to get on that bus or not.
Good stuff. Rebecca, what about you? What tell us some of the ingredients of your process that has allowed you guys to be as prolific as you've been.
I would say I echo a lot of what Juan just said. As you said, Spencer, earlier in the conversation, we see more than 100 opportunities a year, yet we typically close 5 or 6 acquisitions a year. And so it definitely is a very highly selective process on finding the right partnership. And it really comes down to the relationships. We have to have a lot of the same core values in order for that partnership to work post-closing, whether or not the owners stay with us long-term or if only for a transition period, because their influence is throughout that entire company. And so those core values need to align post-closing as well. And so we do definitely spend a lot of time on getting to know people as people so that we can see where that real alignment is.
All right. So, I gotta ask, like, so 6% effectively closing rate on the deals that you actually evaluate. And Bon, I'd like your feedback on this too. What are maybe the two or three most common reasons why you pass on a deal?
Yeah, I would say for us, a lot of things, we're so focused on the bulk sector and really staying core to that niche of the market. So a lot of opportunities fall a little bit outside of. They might still be in the transportation and logistics space, but they're just a little far outside of what we're focused on the bulk side. So that's where a lot of the deals are not necessarily a fit for us. And once we focus more on the bulk sector, we're focused more on, companies that align with us from what I was just talking about, right? That cultural fit. So that's where we really start to focus within that sector of the dry bulk space.
Yeah. What about you, Bon?
And well, first I would say we are similar to what Rebecca was describing, but within our lens, we try to stay really true to the non-asset based attributes of our own business.
Right.
So we might see a ton of deals and they may be absolutely spectacular businesses, but if they're asset intensive, we're a pass, right? Just, we just wouldn't go to the next step with that group. But then, after that, we get into things like customer concentration, looking at customer concentration dynamics, geographies that they serve, some of those types of things. And, for us in particular, within the agent-based freight forwarding community, those are the easiest transactions to do for us because everyone is culturally aligned. And many of the agents out there are almost by definition an entrepreneur participating in an agency network is already relying on a centralized shared services back office organization somewhere else. So it's not like you have to, rip out their accounts payable department or accounts receivable department. They don't have one to begin with, right? So those are much easier to transact with and integrate than a greenfield acquisition, where there may be some redundancies. But those redundancy is also code word for cost synergy opportunity, which is also, part of what comes into play.
Yeah. No, that's all great stuff. So let's focus our attention on the back half of 2025. What are some of the developments that you all are keeping a close eye on as you think about your overall acquisition strategy and things that might influence, both how you target and how you value companies? Obviously there's tariffs. There's a lot of things around immigration. There's a lot of different things, freight fraud. There's access to capital, as you talked about, bonds. So what are some of the things that you have your eye on that will influence how you think about success in the second half?
Ladies first.
All right, I'll go first. There's a lot of different factors going on in the market. We've already talked about tariffs. I think that's probably front and center on a lot of things right now, just given the uncertainty and the large impact that can have. There's obviously the new regulation on with FMCSA on the English proficiency that I think is going to impact capacity to a degree. So that could influence the market as well, the transportation market as well. So I think there's a number of different things that we're kind of keeping an eye on to get a good feel for what that influence is going to be on the market. I don't know that there's anything that I would say is going to drastically change our strategy one way or another, but it's still important for us to understand the implications and continue to factor that into our strategy.
Yeah, and I don't think I'll come back to credit markets. I don't think things are going to materially change until the credit markets open back up in terms of kind of who the players are, what the dynamics are. I don't think we're going to wake up tomorrow and all the open questions are going to have to be answered. I think we're going to continue to be operating in this kind of period of uncertainty. Hopefully we'll continue to get positive signs and encouragement. But I don't think there's going to be any kind of bright line, where we can all rest easy and have clarity in terms of what's going on. More practically for us, we're very interested in what's happening in the Transpac and what's happening on the West Coast and port congestion or not, and some of these immigration dynamics are just going to up the ante on that. And then for us, Canada, Mexico, cross-border are also really important kind of threads for us, and kind of what we see as particularly robust opportunities given some of what's going on.
Yeah. From our standpoint, there certainly appears to be a lot of folks that wanted and needed to exit in 23 and 24 and still are kind of hanging in there with hopes that the freight market's going to improve in a meaningful way. How do you all think about that? I mean, there's a lot of folks there's a lot of good companies that, for a lot of things they can't control, their balance sheet's a mess. They have a good company, just not a really good time right now. What advice would you give to folks that are kind of at that stage where maybe they have a good company, but, operating reserves are becoming limited. And, like to your point, Bon, there's not a whole lot of indicators that tell us what's going to happen next. What advice do you give to folks that are in that situation?
I would say at least begin the journey and cultivate the relationships and try to get kind of further downfield towards a transaction. And you'll see, and I think everybody will find their own comfort zone around that and kind of how far they ultimately go. But I would not do nothing, I think is the short version of that. I think there's lots of progress that can be made, even if you really aren't ready, kind of building the relationships with one or more potential partners is time well spent, and getting to know each other, at a minimum, and then again, just kind of bringing it back to Radiant specifically, we're open for business, and we functionally have 3 platforms today. Our U.S. freight forwarding platform, which is domestic international freight forwarding. We have an intermodal and truck brokerage platform out of Chicago, and we have a very robust platform in Canada and Toronto. And so we have kind of 3 teams, ready to kind of lean into opportunities. And we have a little, collegial competitiveness amongst those groups on getting deals done. And so we are eager to engage in those types of opportunities and, see where the conversations take us.
Yeah. Anything to add, Rebecca?
Yeah, as we talked about before, it's interesting as we think about what's this new normal, but you look back at where we've been after post-COVID. Obviously, the market was crazy. Things were going on. There was a lot of momentum post-COVID 21, 22. And we're kind of waiting to get back to that level. But part of it is not, there's a lot of talk lately from the economists that this is not necessarily a freight recession driven by a supply issue. It's more of a capacity issue, right? There's just so many. It's not like the customer base has shrunk that much. It's more so there's just a lot more capacity out in the trucking space and on the asset based side. And part of that just needs to kind of get back to a more of a medium level. And so I think if you're a business owner who's thinking, where does this business go? I'm waiting for this big bounce back. You have to kind of think through, okay, what was that more of a blip in 21 and 22 because there was just the market conditions I was able to take advantage of. And now I'm really at the level of like kind of an ongoing business level, or is there still opportunity for you going forward that you're like, wow, if this or this happens, then the market's going to change for the better for me and it's going to have a better impact on my valuation. So I think really being thoughtful about the future of the business and what's going to impact the business and what's going to be required for that business to grow or get to the valuation levels they're seeking is really important. Because if there's not really a lever that's kind of right in front of them, then I think, now if they're ready, they should start to prepare and go to market and start to build those relationships, as Bond mentioned, so that when they feel that the timing is right or they have the right partner, they can be prepared to move forward.
And I'd like to just make one more comment kind of related to this dynamic, and that is we, and I'm sure others, ultimately can be fairly creative within kind of the earnout structure and kind of ultimate purchase price opportunity. So just because you're not super enthused about your trailing 12 months EBITDA, that doesn't necessarily cap your economic opportunity, right? So, through us, and I'm sure others, there are kind of structures that can be used to give people kind of a full opportunity based on the future financial performance of the business.
Yeah. And it's funny, to your point, I was recently having a conversation with a business owner, with their CFO, and they're like, hey, this is what we think is going to happen. We're going to wait and see. That's like, I think that's great. And then I asked the CFO who's on the phone, who's on the Zoom call. I was like, well, let's just, hey, if best case scenario, let's go through the economics of this. What is the best case scenario? If what you think is going to happen happens, like, what are we going to be looking at from a new TTM performance? And, the CEO, you appreciate this one. They have a hard time, being as, you kind of come from that CPA, CFO background. They have a hard time being as optimistic as a traditional founder. And so it's like, well, I don't know about that. But I think the point is, to the degree that owners can get them in position to hedge, as you guys have both suggested right now, it doesn't put you on a path to necessarily sell your business, but what it does, it gives you the actual option to pivot if situation changes, you don't like the situation you're facing anymore. But that takes time on the relationship development side. You have to begin somewhere. And so I appreciate the good words on that. So beyond 2025, what do you expect in terms of deal transaction volume activity as we get on further into 2026? Start with you, Bon.
We're active in multiple conversations, and we would, I don't think we're going to do another 12 in the next 12 months. But I expect we will conclude multiple transactions in the next 6 months.
And just for the broader market, what do you think will happen there in terms of just total volume of deals? What do you compare it to 2024, 25?
I am not sure, right? I'll keep coming back to the credit markets, right? So, I don't know that there will be, on a comparative basis, people have less financial flexibility today than they did 2 years ago. And so kind of depending on what comparative time periods we're looking at. I mean, it's a tougher market in which to get deals done, which is why I think you made a really good point earlier. I think it's from the seller's perspective, it's really important that they're qualifying their buyers. And they, it might not be a good use of time for some, if you find a potential acquirer who's trying to get you under LOI so they can then go try to arrange financing, that's probably not a good use of your time.
Yeah. And that's just, that this points to educating yourself about the process and how it works. And so, good word there. Rebecca, what about you? What are you predictions in terms of deal volume in 2026? How do you see things shaking up?
Yeah, I think for the back half of 2025, it's definitely going to be a little bit slower. We definitely are not seeing the number of deals coming through on a weekly basis that we normally do. It's definitely slowed up a little bit. Part of that could be summertime, it's usually a little bit slower, but I think part of it is just the uncertainty in the market. So companies that were maybe preparing have decided to wait a little bit longer. So I imagine post Labor Day, when some of the tariff noise has started to get resolved, we'll start to see more activity. So that'll probably bode for a stronger 2026 as those deals start to close in the early part of 2026. And I think we'll start to see a little bit more activity then. But those are for the deals that are sponsored by, or I'm sorry, investment banking backed and provided by advisors. I think there's always opportunities, like Bond mentioned, we've done a number of ones that were their agencies, things that they had sort of a conversation or a line of sight on already. So there's always opportunity for those types of transactions to help fill in a little bit in the interim. But I imagine it'll start to pick up in the back half of 2025 and in 2026.
I love it. All right, well, we'll wrap up with a little bit of a wild card question here, guys. We've got I believe our network is a group of folks that are dedicating themselves to improvement, bettering themselves. So tell us about either a book or a podcast that you're engaged with right now that's giving you energy or some inspiration as you lead your companies. Rebecca.
So I'll take it.
Go ahead, Bon.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
All right, there you go, Rebecca. Ladies first.
I listen to a lot of audiobooks because I have a pretty lengthy commute and I like to listen to books when I'm gardening. So I typically do audiobooks. And one book I'm listening to currently is called Becoming Supernatural. It's basically essentially about mind over matter. So using positive thoughts and energy to help change your brain chemistry to lead to a more balanced and healthier life. So it's been a little bit more of a more scientific read, but I've been enjoying just the whole philosophy of being able to help influence positivity into your lives and bringing more balance and a healthier lifestyle.
Becoming Supernatural. I like that.
Wow, I could use some of that, right? I could use some of that.
Yes.
Well, first I would say I can't believe we made it this far through our conversation and no one has said AI yet, right?
Well, that's on purpose.
That in and of itself. Yeah. So I've been listening to some podcasts, kind of a grouping of kind of entrepreneurs talking about master scaling, and right now, there's just a lot of conversation around AI, the impacts of AI. And, as the founder and kind of pilot of the Radiant ship, trying to figure out how and where we engage in AI, right? And kind of our approach to that whole opportunity set and some of the things that we're starting to do. But, it wasn't long ago for me that AI and machine learning was word salad. And I didn't really know what the heck many of these things meant. So just trying to get my own self kind of oriented to the field of play so that I can try to be a good fiduciary around kind of our own strategic initiatives in AI.
That's a good word to end on right there. One of the things that I feel so important, if you're going to be in the M&A world, you got to stay agile and you got to stay educated. And so thank you both for taking time to educate our audience and our network. Congrats on your successes through your acquisitions over the last 12 to 18 months. Keep up the great work, and we'll see you